So welcome to Love is Alchemy, a monthly free call offered by the Love Mandala, where our mission is to help individuals build a strong foundation of self-love and experience more love in all their relationships. And within this time here, my role, the way I see it, is just to facilitate and share ideas and try to inspire you. And but from a perspective of really respecting whatever your belief system is. So I think a lot of belief systems have different words for the same thing, and it's totally okay if we don't see things the same. So just take whatever resonates with you and move on. And my goal is for this to be a safe space where you can feel able to connect to love and the energy that resides within that. And feel free, I'm not going to be offended if you need a bio break or take care of yourself in any way you want to. If you have questions, because I've changed my format and I'm putting myself as just a speaker on YouTube, you can put them in the chat, or you can hold them if you want to have more conversational dialogue at the end, and I'll leave time for that after. So today we're going to really focus on caring for the emotional body, and we're going to talk just about a couple things. We'll talk about how the emotional body fits into what I call the 5 layers of the self. And then we're going to talk a little bit, touch on some science that's related to how our layers are connected, and in particular emotions. And then we will go into a practice and close out. So we'll keep it kind of focused, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. One of the fundamental things that I really live by is that our experience of love is really rooted in how we relate to ourselves. What's that foundation with ourself as the first relationship we have? So learning the nuances of how do we meet ourselves in a more specific way on these different levels is where I like to spend some of the time in these calls. So let's shift gears and talk about this. I'm going to share some slides with you. Give me one sec to bring them up. And let me know if somebody can just give me a thumbs up and let me know if you're seeing them, okay? Okay. So we have shown this slide before if you've been here before. The way I kind of look at ourselves is that there are different layers, and this is simplified. Obviously, there's deeper mysteries at play than everything we could encapsulate here, but it's a nice model to think about how we relate to ourselves. So we have our physical body with our 5 senses. We have an energy body that you might relate to the chakras or the meridians, or maybe you just relate to that you can feel your energetic presence, or you can feel other people's energy. Then the emotional body, which is, of course, our positive and negative emotions, and expresses really as it can be expressed a lot of ways, like in the body as tears and tension, or, through the heart. And really, our maturation comes from learning. It helps us mature because as we move towards positive emotions and work with the negative ones, we sort of evolve. The mental body is kind of an obvious one for all of us. It has our conscious focus on thoughts. The light body, or what I call the higher self, is the other aspect. And rather than, let me show you the next slide, because one of the things that I think people don't always know is like we're just going to focus on the emotional level, but the spiritual aspect of ourselves, the higher self, is sort of like this overarching aspect that guides us and is really devoted to our lives. And when we become aware of it, then we can begin to interact with it. Many people are not even aware this is going on, and it's in the background and it's unaddressed. But once we become conscious of it, then we can work with it, and it has a higher perspective on everything. And what happens when we have these different layers is if we only work on one level, like let's just say you only work on the mental level or only the physical, very often we don't have an integrated solution, and you see the same problem show up maybe somewhere else, or it comes back. And so the higher self is able to step in and really give us a perspective and guide us to approach things from a more integrated or holistic way, because it has a higher perspective than any of these other layers. So it's not just another, like the 5th layer of a body, but it's the overarching guide that we can turn to make sure we're in alignment with what our soul's really trying to accomplish, or what, how to move through things most easily in an integrated way. Okay, feel free to throw anything in the chat if you have questions. So let's talk just a little bit about some of the science. I've been having a lot of fun because I have a healthcare background looking at some of the research around this topic. And these are just a couple pieces that relate more to emotions, but they're a good example of how the bodies are very integrated. And what we see, so the heart and the brain, a lot of people will talk about in how important it is to connect both at the heart and the brain. And they're basically like a circuit of what's the right word? Electrical signals are going back all the time. And they have learned to measure these electrical signals. And I'm not even sure I know how to articulate the EMF measure, but the heart's sending 50,000 more of these femtotesla than the brain's to the brain's 10 equivalent. So what it's telling you is like the electrical activity of the brain is significantly higher than, of the heart is significantly higher than the brain. When they look at it as a EMF amplitude, people have characterized it in another study as 60 times greater in amplitude. So there were different measurements, so they're not the same thing, but basically the electrical signals are interacting back and forth, on and off. And they are actually impacting our nervous system, our hormones. So your chemicals are involved in all this too, the chemicals within our body, our neurotransmitters, etc. So understanding that, I'm just going to couple it with a couple other pieces of data that are interesting. There's a Dr. Perd who was the author of Molecules of Emotion, great book. It's been around for quite a while, and a lot of science. There's so much research being done that it doesn't really always circulate to you know broadly. And I always found this really interesting. But he demonstrated that neuropeptides and their receptors are the biological basis for emotions, beliefs, and expectations. So one way it's easy to relate to this as is you can think about your cells having receptors for emotions, and think about those times when you had like a full body emotion where you're really in awe, or maybe you were really upset. It could be anything. And you felt it in every bit of yourself. And that's in sort of a way of understanding why we have this full effect of emotions in the body. And also the idea that they can be stored. There's a great book in the psychology circles that's quite famous called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about how much our experience with things that are suppressed or traumas that we have are stored in the body. And there's whole bodies of work around that, as well as how to release them. And we'll do just a small exercise today that's not that level of depth, but it's in the same sort of school of thought. And then another place that does a lot of research is the Heart Math Institute. I think they're on the West Coast here. And one of the things they talk about is that they measure heart rhythms, and a lot of their work is around is helping people get in coherence between the heart and the brain. So your negative emotions disturb your heart rhythms and make them more erratic. If you see the data, the positive emotions smooth that out. And what you get when you're in those positive emotions is what they call coherence between the heart and the brain. And they actually have measured that you get better brain function. So you get clearer thinking, you can focus better. There's all kinds of benefits. And it also, of course, affects your hormones and so on. So the way I like to articulate this is that all of our cells have consciousness. So they've got receptors, they've got these awareness of what's going on in all the rest of us. And this is why even our words matter when we speak to ourselves, or the thinking we're having about ourselves. And my work with people is really to help them reintegrate with love, to embrace all the disaffected, lost parts of ourselves. And that includes emotions. So it's not just like integrating your inner child, but it's also integrating what fear you had this week. Is a good example. It's a small thing, but that aspect is part of who we are. So I'll take a breath and I'm just going to check the chat just in case anybody has any questions while we're going through this. I know it's a lot all at once. And I'll keep an eye on it if somebody thinks of one. So one of the things that's important, I think, also to recognize is that when we talk about emotions, there's kind of two big kinds. There's what you could call heart emotions or heart feelings. And then there are those that are fueled by the emotional and mental bodies, and they're really different things. So just to differentiate, so we know we're talking about the ones that are the mental, emotional body ones. The difference is that the ones that are really driven by our emotional mental bodies are often based on misunderstandings, maybe confusion, maybe judgments, maybe a wounded part of ourselves that needs healing. And they're dramatic, they're intense, they cloud us. They're the kind of emotions when you need to make a decision, you can't get clear. Like, I'm just not sure I know what to do, or you want to make a quick rash decision and like a part of you knows maybe that's not such a great idea. And as opposed to the heart ones, which are the ones that are like they're much quieter generally, but they're super powerful though. So differentiating and understanding, like, there's also this aspect of you that feels peace and love and connection and joy, and all these kind of emotions are heart-based ones that are a little bit different because they're based on a larger perspective of the truth and of who you are and of a higher, let's just say, vibration. Um, Now, when we have the ones that are more difficult, the emotion and the emotions fueled by the mental body or a misunderstanding, we want to suppress them a lot of times because they're painful, and or sometimes we don't want to accept that we are feeling that way. Like sometimes we don't want to be that person that feels petty, or maybe we're judging them. But the problem with that is that when we do any kind of suppression or we push them away and really make ourselves distant from them, first of all, they're in your cells, like that response is already part of who you are. So they end up getting stored in the body, which isn't healthy for us, and they tend to persist and expand. My experience, I think the easiest experience of relating to that for me is when I'm afraid of something. If I don't want to look at it and figure out why, or if I need to do something about it, I'll just get more anxious and more fearful. And if I start judging it and say, like, well, why am I so anxious? Why am I fearful? Then I'll get more fearful. And so they can build on themselves. And so learning how to sort of short circuit this and go, okay, we can do something about these. We don't have to get carried away and get overwhelmed by them, is the opportunity we have. Is that making sense to folks? So we're going to try practice and shift gears, and I'll explain it to you with a slide, and then I'm going to take the slides down. I'm just going to walk you through it so you don't have to remember anything. I will make the slides available on the portal so that you can get them later. So you don't have to, if it's something you want to keep track of. And it's just called the Accept, Embrace, and Love Free Practice. It's really in concept very simple. So the first thing, I want you to just kind of imagine this idea of a boat. So emotions can be super turbulent, like the waters and the ocean and the sea, and we can be tossed by them just like a boat. And the first step on this process is really to anchor into the higher self or the spiritual self or the wise self, whatever you like to call it, because there's a place in us that is always observing what we're experiencing. And if we connect to that, it's like dropping an anchor. So we're not going to get carried away by the emotion and overwhelmed. So that's going to be our first step. I'll walk you through that. And then we're going to identify uh, the, actually, I'll pause here because there's a good question in the chat before we go into the rest of the process. So the question is, there are definitely feelings with the emotions fueled by the emotional mental bodies, but how do you recognize something like love? What does it feel like? How do you know it's real? And I welcome anybody else to add their 2 cents as well to this. But my experience with it is that there's almost, what does love feel like at the most I guess, expansive level, it never divides us, it never separates us, and it doesn't leave us it always leaves us in a place of peace. So if you're wondering, like, is this a real feeling? Is this something I can trust? It it will be able to you'll be able to stay centered and balanced in it. And when we're in those other emotions and we're thinking like, well, is this coming from, where's this coming from? You're going to find a tumultuous experience and not be able to keep and hold your center like this anchor we're talking about. Um, but they are more gentle. And one of the things about them is that a lot of times we actually aren't that comfortable with the positive feelings. If we've had a history of a lot of tumult and chaos in our home, or maybe we were judged for, like maybe you had a super serious parent and you were skipping around the house and they're telling you to, sit still, and, you were dampened down as a child. Sometimes that joy or that love that is sort of natural inside of us gets pushed away. So there is actually this opportunity to get more comfortable with the positive feelings. There's a uh, trying to think of his name, super famous. There's a writer who wrote a book about how there's upper limits. Like we actually get comfortable in a range of how we feel things. And so we might be like, oh, I'm used to being about this happy. And maybe you have this opportunity to open to more. And it's like, I don't know quite what to do with that. Like, who am I if I don't have that old story? Or who am I if I'm not running these other feelings? And so that's a journey in and of itself that your question reminds me of, Sharon. And hopefully that's helpful. If it's not, add to your question in the chat. So back to the practice before we jump in and do it, and then we'll close out. We're going to do a process of accepting, embracing, and really setting free or integrating. And one of the things I'll say is a lot of it is just like allowing it to be and embracing it like this is what's here. Just accept that it's here, and let's see. I'll walk you through these details. We don't need to go through each of them. And we're going to see if we can just hold presence with that feeling and see what happens in the integration process or the release process, because this is what really allows them to be freed. So, and I share this in the context of I will be running a program at some point where we'll talk about other tools like this, and we'll in this call we'll do some other tools in some of the other bodies. So this one is just a tool of transformation from the emotional body, and that's sort of the context in which we're talking about this. But I will take the slides down now and stop them. And feel free, you can just close your eyes and we'll transition into the practice. So take your time just to breathe a little bit and to find yourself centered in a place where you can feel your heart, however that works for you. If you feel at all stressed or you're thinking too much because of all the information that I shared, just take a minute to slow your breath. So maybe inhale and hold it 1, 2, 3, and then slowly let that out through your mouth. Just blow it out as slow as you can and just let that kind of carry any tension out. You can do this again if you want by breathing in through your nose and then release it again slowly through your out breath. And then you might just check for any pockets of tension in your body and just consciously, acknowledge them and invite them to release. And you can breathe into those pockets too as sort of a way to help them relax. And then just feel kind of the spaciousness of inside of you, around you. I want you to think about if you can invite your breathing just to become natural now. And imagine, because it's true, you're pulling oxygen through your whole body. So imagine that all your cells are breathing this calm, filtered air that's coming in, that's just flowing through you and inviting relaxation, presence, and peace. And before we go any deeper, I'm going to invite you to just pick a feeling you'd like to work with. And I would recommend, I wouldn't pick the biggest unresolved feeling you have in your life, but something that's real to you, maybe something on the that you experienced recently. It might be you might have to think of a situation that caused a little discomfort, or sometimes you can just go to the body and say, like, show me, like I feel a little uncomfortable or feel some dis-ease somewhere, and that will bring up something. So give you a moment to do that. And when you feel ready, I want you to imagine that you're anchoring before we go to the next step. Really in deep, you can think of it as anchoring down into your heart or into the deepest part of you. And I want you just to kind of feel for what's the part of you that is at peace underneath any storm that comes by. What is the part of you that is really observing you and watches and holds for you day to day? I've heard it described as the silence, like behind the silence, is one way of thinking of it. And I just want you to be in touch with that part of you. So I'm calling it an anchor, but it's just sort of that some part of you is still aware of that as we do this process. We're going to bring it along with us. And as you feel ready to invite this feeling forward, I want you just to, welcome it into your awareness. And if you need to, you can even personify it, like give it a shape and a color, or maybe just imagine it as a dark cloud that's in front of you. And imagine you're just sitting in the same room with it. And especially if you haven't wanted to feel this or to recognize it, just really offer it this new feeling of, I'm not in resistance anymore. In this moment, I'm willing to feel and hear who you are and what is there. And if you can tap into what I would call unconditional acceptance, which really means, like, no matter what this is, we're choosing to be neutral. We're not judging it. We are just being with it. And we are here to also understand and to listen if there is a hidden gift present. Oftentimes our feelings are coming out of that there's something underneath them that is needing to be communicated. Not always, sometimes they just need to move through us and be felt. So open to whether it's seeking to be felt or felt and understood. And if you feel there is a message or some understanding or communication, invite yourself to receive that. And whether you understand it now or it comes later, that's fine. Even if you're not sure, you can just make that invitation and then just let it be. And we're going to now just shift into embracing it. And the way I think about that or offer that to you is to just, your presence is love, your attention is love. And you can also offer a visual, like maybe you're sending your arms around it in love, or maybe you're infusing it with a cloud of, beautiful blue, something that feels like peace and love to you. You can use a visual for that, or you can just hold the feeling of love surrounding this part of you that was previously not really listened to, or maybe not fully listened to. And allow your higher consciousness to really expand and merge and bring love to this part of you and every cell in your body, wherever that feeling had been held. Let it just expand out and filter through you. This love is always within you and accessible. When we get quiet enough, we're finding that heart connection. And just feel at one with all of this that's happened. You're at one with the feeling, you're at one with your higher self. And last, we just invite it to either release if it's been felt and ready to go, or if it's been felt and it needs integration because it's just transforming, that's equally valid. It may have just brought you information that you needed and be a hidden gift. But either way, it's either going to release or dissipate or integrate. And there's no love, it is not forceful. So this is an allowing, this is a surrender. And now bring yourself gently back to your conscious mind. You might move a little bit to just feel yourself, stretch a little bit. And when you feel ready, open your eyes. You can keep that connection and anchoring to your higher self, to that feeling of peace or love. And and just to wrap up, I'll just review that we touched on our 5 layers of the integrated self and how the emotional body interacts with that. And as we've done this practice to shift an emotion, it offers you something that you can do time and again, because sometimes emotions need more than one sort of setting to do that. It depends how big they are. And if you ever find that you're tapping into one that's really significant that overwhelms you, then that's the time to actually back out and get help. Sometimes we need, if we touch something that's very suppressed and deep, or that has, a trauma aspect to it, sometimes we really need somebody to hold for us. So that's also important, I think, for me to share with you and just to keep in your mind as you work with emotions. But thank you for sharing, participating, and if there's someone you think would enjoy it, please spread the word. Um, I'd love to have you come back next time or join the videos on YouTube and watch them at your leisure. Thank you for coming to Love is Alchemy, where love is the medicine.